Welcome. In celebration of Black History Month, NAMIC is thrilled to engage dynamic leaders and authors in a conversation that I believe many of us will find insightful and full of valuable nuggets to our professional journey. Dr. Robinson is an award-winning business school professor, international speaker, and entrepreneur. Since 2008, he has been leading faculty member at Rutgers Business School, where he's an associate professor of management and entrepreneurship. In 2021, he was appointed to the Prudential Chair in Business, and since 2013, he has been the academic director for the Center of Urban Entrepreneurship and Economic Development. Dr. Robinson is the author of many articles and books on the topics of organizational theory, entrepreneurship, and workforce diversity. He is the co-author, along with Dr. Randall Pinkett, of Black Faces in White Spaces, 10 Game-Changing Strategies to Achieve Success and Find Greatness. And recently, he released Black Faces in High Places, 10 Strategic Actions for Black Professionals to Reach the Top and Stay There. That will be the topic of our conversation today. I'm also thrilled to introduce Dr. Randall Pinkett, who has established himself as an entrepreneur, speaker, author, and scholar, and as the leading voice for his generation in business, technology, diversity, equity, and inclusion. He is the co-founder, chairman, and CEO of his fifth venture, BCT Partners, a multi-million-dollar research, training, consulting, technology, and analytics fund headquartered in Newark, New Jersey. BCT's mission is to provide insights about diverse people that leads to equity. The company has been recognized by Forbes as one of America's best management consulting firms, Ernst & Young Entrepreneur of the Year, 5,000 list of the fastest growing private companies in America, and the Black Enterprise BE 100s list of the nation's largest African American owned businesses. Welcome to our authors. All right, good afternoon, everyone. We are thrilled to have you join us today, and this is going to be an exciting conversation. We're getting on camera. I see Dr. JR is with us, Dr. Randall is with us, and with me as well is Susan and Stephanie, who've been the amazing backhand folks who've made this possible. So I want to give them a shout out for making this webinar possible. So welcome, gentlemen. Let's get started. Let's jump right in.
Thank you, Anne-Marie.
Black Faces in High Places. Why did you write this book?
Well, let me start off by saying, first of all, thank you to you and to NAMIC for having us today. I'm no stranger to NAMIC. You know, I've been working with you and others for at least a dozen years. So some of you have heard me talk about this book coming, and here it is finally. Black Faces in High Places. We did write a book before, and you know that was 12 years ago, and we said, you know, it was good at the time. It was helpful. People used it to advance their careers, and we said, well, but maybe the relevance of that book's going to disappear. That was back in 2010, 11, or 12 when the President Obama was in place, and we were thinking to ourselves, wow. There are Black faces who are getting to the high places, so we won't need another book. Well, some things happened along the way that made us realize that there's still a lot of challenges. The representation and the numbers are still small in terms of Black people and for that matter, people of color at the tops of organizations. We can go over that a little later. And we were still getting the questions. What do I do? How do I address some of these things I'm seeing in my workplace? And what's the path towards getting to the top? So that's at least some of the reasons why we wrote the book. I mean, Dr. Pinkett there might want to add some more to that.
Awesome, Dr. Randall.
I think he covered it perfectly. Now, the only thing I would add is the subtitle is very telling.
Yeah.
10 strategic actions to reach the top and stay there. And while our first book arguably spoke to this idea of getting to the top, as you know, Anne-Marie, it's a different set of challenges once you get to the top.
Oh, yes.
And you're in a decision-making power or you're in a position of influence. It's a whole new set of rules, a whole new set of expectations, a whole new set of pressures. And so we spoke to both the ascent to the top, but also the preparation needed that once you get to the top, you can stay at the top.
Yeah. Very well placed. What a great introduction. We have a lot of people joining us. Welcome. We're thrilled to have you here. We're going to dive right in. And Dr. JR, I want to give a shout out. I'm so glad you mentioned this. We have so many individuals who've been through the NAMIC ELDP program, as well as the NAMIC leadership program. I know you're no stranger to these individuals. You teach you're our lead faculty for the NAMIC leadership program. So welcome to everyone. And for those of you who've been through these programs, I know you see his face, give him a shout out on the chat feature. Let's engage. We want this to be a highly interactive discussion. So as you listen to the nuggets, ask away. We're going to be kind of toggling between conversations and looking at your questions. So everyone, welcome. We want to hear from you. Let the chat keep going. And I'm going to jump right in and say, wow, you kick off this book with the matter of George Floyd. Woo! Yeah, what a pivotal time in our history as a country, as a people. Why did you start the book there?
So I'll jump in, and then Dr. Robinson, I know he was about to jump in too. As we know, that was such a pivotal moment, and you indicated that, Anne-Marie, in your question. And we were debating quite for some time where should we start the book, and it's not just the fact that it was such a pivotal, significant, tragic moment, but it really typifies the crossroads of being a Black face in a high place. And I say that from the following standpoint. Almost every Black person I know had an experience after George Floyd of folks coming to them saying something. What do you think? What's been your experience? Oh, I didn't know. Oh, what can we do? Oh my gosh, I didn't know Black professionals had these challenges. I didn't know Black people had these challenges. If you're a Black person post George Floyd, you had that experience, unless you just went and hid. And so what we pivoted in the introduction was getting under the hood on how certain Black faces in high places experienced that moment as people of influence and power. Ken Frazier at Merck, Mark Mason at Citigroup, Rosalind Brewer, then at Starbucks, now at Walgreens. Jeffrey will mention others that we highlighted that I'm perhaps forgetting, but we talk about how their family approached them at that moment. Should I speak out? Should I say something? How their colleagues approached them. What are you going to say? What are you going to do? And the decisions that they wrestled with and the outcome of their decisions resulting in multi-million and multi-billion dollar commitments to Black equity, to Black empowerment, to Black social issues. The list goes on. Seeing the juxtaposition of George Floyd's murder against these Black faces in high places, we felt like that's the right tone to set in honor of the tragedy of George Floyd, but in deference to the struggle of Black leaders in that moment. Dr. Robinson, what say you?
Well, to just add another dimension to it, sometimes people will use the phrase that we chose as the title of the book as a negative. They'll say, well, what happens when we get Black faces to high places? Do they do something for the community? Do they think about others? And sometimes the sort of stereotype or is that they don't. And frankly, we found so many examples of people who did. And in the case of the murder of George Floyd, there were Black CEOs and C-suite people and personnel who were stepping up, making not only statements, but also these commitments, as we talked about. And that's a theme that runs through the book. We are all about excellence. So you got to do your job great. You got to be at top of the game. All those things are necessary. There are some other things to know, which I'm sure we'll get into about how to get there. But at the same time, we don't back away from a responsibility that has to do with our community, the community that we come from, the Black community. I don't care whether you're Black from America, Black from Africa, Black from the Caribbean, that's the community that we come from and we feel connected to. And so we think there are some important things to point out there. Now, yeah, we're talking about it from our Black perspective. Certainly, there are a lot of parallels for other communities of color, for other groups that may even share some of the challenges that we talk about in the book. But for us, there is something unique, special, challenging about being one of the people who is at the top who looks like us.
Well said, well said. So let's talk about the two of you. This is your second book together. The first one, as you alluded to in the introduction, Dr. JR, was, Black faces in white spaces. So why did you write this book together?
Why did we write the first one, or why did we write the second one?
The second one together, right? The first one, like, okay, great, we did great.
Because he cannot get rid of me. That's why he cannot get rid of me. I have known Dr. Randall over there before he was a doctor, 30 plus years. From literally the first week I got on campus as a student in engineering at Rutgers University. He was sitting behind me when we were at the Rutgers chapter of the National Society of Black Engineers. So basically, he cannot get rid of me. I will always be there for him, and I expect him to be here for me. Is a brotherhood that's formed for many years, but we share experiences, and we've shared the experience of being the only one or the only one. We've shared the experience of being in the room and being able to be part of the decision-making process. So we take this seriously. This is personal, and frankly, we had so many things we wanted to say after the first book that didn't get into the first book, and now 12 years have passed. And we've experienced some things, and even more importantly, we've looked at the trajectories of many of the people we have interviewed and profiled in the book. And we've learned some things from our own experiences and theirs that we wanted to put down so that people don't have to feel as if they don't have a pathway and a way to be that brings not only their authenticity and their community mindedness, brings their whole self into thinking about how they may make impact inside companies, in their own companies, in nonprofits, in the community, all throughout.
Fantastic. Dr. Randall, any additions apart from really being bamboozled into writing it again?
Hey, it's been a real blessing and a real honor to have co-authored these two books with Dr. Robinson. For those that don't know our story, we met when we were in our first week at the first meeting of the Rutgers chapter of the National Society of Black Engineers. As Dr. Robinson tells it, when they told us to turn to the person next to you and say hello, he turned around and saw another tall, skinny guy and said, "Hello, I'm Jeff Robinson." And I said, I'm Randy Pinkett. I was Randy back then. Now I'm all fancy like Lawrence Fishburne. I'm Randall. And the interesting dynamic is when we wrote the first book, Black Faces in White Places, we were legitimately Black faces in white places. We still are in many respects. And now that we've written Black Faces in High Places 12 years later, Dr. Robinson is now a tenured professor, the Prudential Chair at the Rutgers Business School. And I'm sitting at the helm as chairman and CEO of BCT Partners, recognized by Forbes, Inc., Black Enterprise as one of the top businesses in the country. So now we're Black faces in high places. So the book has chronicled our own trajectories as well as the trajectories of others that we profiled or interviewed in the book, which I'm sure we'll talk about. But yeah, we had a lot on the cutting room floor from the first book. It's like they'd say Prince had a vault of songs that we're still waiting for some of those songs to come out from the vault. We had a vault of content from that first book that was on the cutting room floor. And so it was both an opportunity to take that content and to reframe it into a present day context, but also because of George Floyd and COVID and other events, we had a lot more to say about what's happening for our community and our society.
Fantastic. So I'm going to just jump to a question because this really gets into that amazing intro. And our audience are really reading your backgrounds, by the way. So Dr. Randall, this is for you. From C Powers, she says, what was your experience like being selected for The Apprentice? Talk to us about that.
Yes. So,
Yeah.
so the story I'll be telling my grandchildren. Granddad was on a reality TV show. And Granddad won. That's great. I didn't embarrass the family name.
That's good. That's good.
Because it didn't have to go down like that, but it did. And so, yes, I was the 4th season winner. Some of y'all out there thought I was the 1st season. No, that was Kwame. That I was the season 4. If you've been around long enough, and I ended up, yes, being named The Apprentice. So there's 2 experiences to speak to. There was the experience filming the show. Then there's the experience winning and working for the Trump organization. Filming the show was a blast. I loved it. I'm a competitor. I was an athlete in college, track and field. I love a competition. And of course, I love to win a competition. So you can't go wrong in that regard. In the filming and the airing. And Dr. Robinson came to many of my viewing parties. We had a lot of fun too on the tour. But then working for the Trump organization, by comparison, you can probably imagine how that went down. I was a bit naive, a little less experienced, and a bit less exposed. And so working in an organization that in many ways was counter to the values that I uphold and we uphold at BCT. A combative environment, an unnecessarily aggressive environment, an environment where you saw no representation. I was the only Black executive that I saw throughout the entire organization over the entire year. And so at the end of my apprenticeship, which was a year-long apprenticeship, I was quite ecstatic to return back to BCT, to continue the work that we had done, and to be in an environment that was reflective of my identity, my values, and more specifically, this idea that to be successful in business is not a zero-sum game. The way Donald approached it, for him to win, somebody had to lose. And we do not subscribe to that. And the book, we espouse that. Strategic action number 6 is leverage our might. And the ethos of that is an African-centered ethos, not a Eurocentric ethos, that we're not competing against each other. We can make the pie bigger together, and we can all have a bigger slice of the same pie.
Yeah, Ubuntu, right?
There you go. That's what I'm talking about. Ubuntu. It's in the book. You just got me hyped. Ubuntu.
All right, awesome. Thank you for that. And keep the questions coming. Please use the Q&A option. That way I'll be able to see it and read your questions. I assume the chat feature is where we're giving the shout outs. So put the questions in the Q&A and I'll be able to read them out and have them addressed. So let's talk about the people you interviewed. So you profiled many Black professionals to develop the strategies in the book. Could you tell us about some of them and why you picked them?
Oh yeah, I'll take that one. There are a lot of people in the book. Yeah, some are people that you know. We profiled Oprah Winfrey and Ursula Burns. Ursula Burns is a really interesting story because Ursula Burns was the CEO of Xerox Corporation. And, there's some interesting stories. She's written her own book, but some interesting stories about mentorship. Who was, how did she go through the ranks and who were her mentors and sponsors? Some lessons to learn from her. Carla Harris, who is the vice chair of Morgan Stanley. So we try to capture the stories from some people that are the notables. We have some other folks who you may not know, but who you may you'll love to hear their stories because they're relatable to the things that we experience in the workplace. You'll read about Jeffrey Canada and how he created the Harlem Children's Zone to make a social impact. You'll read about Ken Chenault, and you'll read about Angela Glover Blackwell. And again, in all these cases, we're getting their stories and talking about mentorship, sponsorship, networks, certainly things I talk about when I come to NAMIC, but things that are really important. Those questions that people ask, well, can I have a mentor who doesn't look like me, doesn't share the same identity? And one of the things we say in the book, something I've always said at NAMIC Leadership Seminar, Old school thinking is that you have one all-knowing mentor who tells you everything. So when you're banking on one, then yeah, you're trying to match on that person on every aspect. But what you need to do is have some new school thinking around the portfolio of mentors. And the folks in our book talk about how they had their different mentors for different things. Another one more example. We talk about folks. Now I'm blanking on names from McDonald's. Don Thompson.
Don Thompson.
Who, when we first interviewed him for the first book, he was rising through the ranks at McDonald's Corporation. By the time in between the first book and the second book, he actually became the CEO. And so we have some of the things he told us back when we interviewed him back in 2009 or so, and we followed his trajectory to become the CEO. And then he retired. Now he's doing all kinds of great work in social impact, working with schools in Chicago. And that arc is a fantastic arc. I need more Black professionals to do that arc, to rise through the ranks, get to the top, and then, you could become the statesman or stateswoman. You could become a diplomat. You can become the leader of a nonprofit. But at that point, you have directed resources from some of these big companies into the communities where we come from. And I think that's really important. I think advocating for our community and for the things that are important to communities of color is not done enough. Sometimes we get a little discouraged or maybe a little afraid that we're not sure whether this is appropriate. And I'll guarantee you, there are other people advocating for their communities. You should do it too. All right, I don't want to get on my soapbox, but that's a couple of snapshots of people who we've profiled in the book, and they are some great stories of how you can get to the top and not lose yourself.
Well, I love that because I think mentorship is one of the most common questions we get. And Dr. JR, you can attest to that, right?
That's
when
right.
we were telling people to list their mentors, their champions, and how sometimes people fudge that or their perceptions of that. So I think that is a key thing to take away. And for everyone, where to buy the book is in the chat feature. So please go to Amazon. I know Stephanie just shared the link. This book is invaluable, not because I know the two of them, but because these are the questions for those of us who are in leadership and especially adult professional development. These are the questions we get through and through. And so what a way to get the answers in one place and learning from others so that you don't have to repeat the same mistakes. So
that's right.
I strongly advocate for that. So Dr. Randall, we've talked about, in the book, you've detailed 10 strategic actions. Which one is your favorite?
My favorite is strategic action number 1. And the strategic actions are the cumulative findings from the patterns that we saw in the interviews and profiles of the people in the book. Meaning, what were the common strategies that people employed to get to the top and stay there? And each strategy builds on each other. 2 builds on 1, 3 builds on 2 and 1, 10 builds on 9 down to 1. And so in that regard, strategic action 1 is the most foundational, the foremost, and the fundamental of all 10 strategic actions. And it's self-determination. Now, I jokingly say, some people hear self-determination, they say, what are you talking about? Kwanzaa in a business book. And I say, well, you got to think more deeply about this. And this is where we started the conversation, Anne-Marie. If you haven't done the inner work to figure out who you are and where you're going, then by the time you get to the top, it's too late. In other words, think of the pressures of leadership like winds blowing around you. When you're just starting your career, the winds aren't blowing that fast. But by the time you get to be a VP, an EVP, and then a CEO and the like, those winds are blowing real fast. And I can speak from firsthand experience on that, which means if you're not rooted in your identity, that's who you are, that's your grounding. And if you don't know your direction, that's your purpose and your compass. if you're not rooted in where and who you are and have a sense of direction and purpose of where you're going, when those winds are blowing faster and faster and faster, it will easily throw you off course. So self-determination is my favorite because, once again, from a kind of Afrocentric perspective, we begin the book and the journey by asking the reader to do that introspection, self-reflection, because that's where the journey really does begin.
I love that. It's you. It's you. Everything revolves around you. You know, I've discussed this with Dr. JR in a when I would always aspire for leadership and have these Afrocentric conversations with my father, who speaks in parables all the time. You've got to decode everything he's saying, and he would always give me this pyramid, and he says, so the pyramid is your journey up, but notice it has really sharp angles on each side. That's how fast you come down with nothing to hold on to, right? So he would always use that analogy, and then he says, and when you get to the top, notice that there's not enough wiggle room for you to really make mistakes, move around. You're really standing on the apex of the whole thing. One wrong move and you're down. That's leadership, right? So I love that. And you've got to know who you are and what you're anchored to. Otherwise, you'll go where the wind blows. And one negative thing, which, by the way, when people think when you're at the top, there's a lot of positivity. No. You really have to build a lot of tough skin. So I really like that. So Dr. JR, which one's your favorite?
Oh, so you asked me that one too, huh?
Yeah.
Well, you know, I know where Dr. Randall there is talking about exercise self-determination. That's number one. But I really like think and act like an entrepreneur, which is strategic action number 7. And here's why, because, the book, as he said, the book is building as we go from 1 to 2 to 3 and so on. And so, there's lots of great foundational work. And certainly we want people to, have the mentors and think about networks and leverage their might. But when you are moving in an organization, one of the things that helps you to stand out is to think like an entrepreneur. And so that entrepreneurial thinking takes place inside of companies as well. And we call that entrepreneurship. We're not the only ones who call it that, but that's what we call it. And we break down how you can use that kind of thought process to add value. That's going to help you to leverage the cultural capital you bring to the table. Look, NAMIC is all about cultural capital. NAMIC knows that your ethnicity, your identity, what you bring to the table has value. And what we're trying to do is make sure all the companies understand that too. And so now, as someone who is bringing a different perspective, how do you use that identity? How do you use your experiences, your network, your mentors, your contacts as a source of entrepreneurial creativity, innovation? Those are the things that help people to stand out as they're moving through. We got plenty of examples and stories. And then I'll put one more layer on it. When we think about social entrepreneurs, we're thinking about people who have double and triple bottom line type of thinking, meaning they are creating initiatives, they're creating programs, they're making connections and linking things, creating projects that are not only good for the company, but are also good for the community writ large. Thinking specifically about communities of color, thinking about the diaspora of African peoples around the world, thinking about connecting the resources that all of these companies have to have dual purposes. We call it, again, double bottom line thinking. And so entrepreneurs are thinking and entrepreneurs are acting with these kinds of thoughts in the back of their mind. And that for us is really important. I love that, because then once you get to that level, now you've got a way that you are approaching your career Now you're going to think about how to synergize with other people, how you're going to transform systems, to leverage the resources and talents of others around you. And often, again, that is separate, different, makes you unique. And those are the kinds of people who get plucked for leadership.
Fantastic. Awesome. Awesome nuggets. I told you we wouldn't disappoint. So let's talk about, the book is called Black Faces in High Places. Is this book useful to non-Black professionals?
Without question, we talk about allyship. And one definition of an ally is being an equal partner to dismantle the barriers that may impede fair outcomes. And part of what it means to be an ally, to be that equal partner, is to understand the lived experiences of those with whom you seek to partner with. And so while the book is geared toward scaffolding and supporting Black professionals on their ascent to the top and their ability to stay there, if you're seeking to ally on behalf of Black professionals, this book is equally relevant to you, because it's going to give you essentially the roadmap for what you need to be mindful of in helping to do two things. Actually, I'll say three things: to think about their mentorship, to think about their sponsorship, and to think about their allyship. Mentorship is about their development, sponsorship is about their advancement, and allyship is about dismantling barriers that impede their development and their advancement. And strategic action number 4 is centered on the networking. Strategic action 5 centered on mentoring. And then when we get into entrepreneurship, we talk about matters of diversity, equity, and inclusion as well. In fact, also strategic action number 7, indeed, talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, which brings in some of these same ideas around allyship. So absolutely relevant. And I found interesting, I saw on Twitter, when we launched this book, I saw non-Blacks posting on Twitter that they had bought Black Faces in White Places and found it to be useful. I was quite humbled by that. I said, well, okay, we cast a wider net than we had anticipated.
Fantastic. Dr. JR, additional insights?
No, that he summed it up very well. Let's do some more questions.
All right, let's see. I have a question. Okay, this is really up your alley, Dr. JR, since you've partnered with us for so many years. How can NAMIC members use this book in their professional development?
Oh yeah, you got lots of ways you can do that. First of all, you need to read it. So go buy it. We got it on audio book. We got it a digital book. We got your paper copies. You can do that. It's going to help you as an individual. But I think you get more power from it when you read it with other people. And that could be a reading group that you establish. It could be a reading group that other people create at a workplace or something along those lines. And then let me go one step further. What we do in the book is every chapter has certain, I guess I could call them challenges, things that we advise you to do, things that you need to sketch out, write down on paper. When we talk about networks, we give you a little table to fill out and say, okay, what's my network look like? Who's in it? What do I need to be thinking about? And so each of the strategic actions has a set of things that you can do to help improve yourself. And again, reading that in a group with a group of people will help you to have some accountability for some of these things. So, I try to make this very practical for people. A lot of folks buy books, put them on the shelf. Don't do that with this book. Pick it up. You don't have to read it all in one sitting. You can read a little bit at a time. Maybe that's the best way to do it. And then, take some time to do the work that we talk about, because that work will pay off in the end. If these are things you haven't done before, it will help you prepare you for where you're going to be and where you're going to go.
Fantastic. So keep the questions coming. I love what's going on in the chat feature, and thank you to both, Dr. JR and Dr. Randall. I see you responding to some of those questions as well. So fantastic. I appreciate that. So let's talk about our industry, the media, cable, entertainment industry. How can the industry leverage this book?
So
yeah, go ahead.
yeah, I mean, when I think about the media and cable industry, it is among those industries that has this challenge and opportunity when we think about the duality of needing representation within the building and needing to foster representation outside the building. I mean, we're talking about media images, we're talking about the stories that are told and that are not told. And one of the pictures we paint in this book is this idea that when you're a Black face in a high place, you've got levers at your disposal. Levers that can effectuate change. Certainly levers that also are focused on achieving a financial return and a bottom line, but also, to Dr. Robinson's points, a social return. Not just making a profit, but making a difference. The question we pose in the book is, what are you willing to do with those levers? What are you willing to do? And realizing that the higher you get, the more influence and power those levers are able to wield. What we don't want is for folks to forget that there were sacrifices that were made for you to have the opportunity to have those levers and then not exercise them to make it easier for somebody else. And so one of the words we use, which I just adore this word, which we all have heard, is being unapologetic about your agenda. Now, I'm not saying don't be strategic about your agenda. Let's make sure we're clear. With Dr. Robinson as one of your faculty members, I know he's used that word strategic in the context of NAMIC seminars. I see him pointing, a high five and a fist, my brother, and another fist. So be strategic, but be unapologetic. Because one of the things we said in the first book was, if you're not playing the game is playing you. And the complement to this book is saying, if you're not pulling the levers for the benefit of our community, somebody else is pulling levers for the benefit of theirs. So being a Black face in a high place in the cable and media industry means being mindful of how you're dismantling barriers for those who aspire to be in your office one day. And it means, as I know this audience already knows, Anna Marie, you're at the front lines doing this work too. So I'm preaching to the choir in some regards, but we're gonna still, sometimes the choir needs a message also. It's about making certain that we have representation of those voices and stories that are often untold and not shown through the channels of what media and cable and the power of that industry have to offer.
I wholeheartedly agree with that. Dr. Jared, let me have you comment on that. We could talk about this all day, this particular question here. And I love the passion with which Dr. Randall just explains this, because it's at the heart of what we do and why we do what we do, especially me as an individual and as NAMIC as an organization. And so what a privilege it is to be able to share this, to amplify it. I wholeheartedly agree that we have the amplifier effect in this industry, and we can use that, or we can have other people use it on our behalf, right? So Dr. Jared, why don't I have you close that part out?
Well, yeah, you're right on. Some of the people who are watching this are in the room when some of these decisions are being made. And and when the rooms don't have representation, we know lots of crazy stuff happens and gets put on, put out there. And I want to speak to both parts of when we talk about the networks and we talk about the operators, that are bringing connectivity and into the communities. It's the same thing. We've got communities that are getting skipped over because nobody is advocating for them inside of the room. And so sometimes it's not just the media part of the communications and media that we're talking about. It's also each of the cable companies and getting the connectivity, the Wi-Fi, skipping over communities of color and not giving us access even in urban, and I've also heard some problems in rural areas. But there are people inside those companies who are advocating and making a difference so that these inequities don't exist. And let me just go one step further, because we have folks from different parts of the industry. I just go back and look at the Fortune 500 list. I look at that Fortune 500 list, and I know, because I've done the research with Dr. Randall over there, that there are only 5 Black CEOs of Fortune 500 companies, and none of them are in cable communications media companies. But there's 5. That means 1%. Now, if you don't know, the Fortune 500 is in control of 2/3 of the gross domestic product of the United States. That's trillions of dollars. There are like 28 million people who work for Fortune 500 companies, including the ones that people are watching from while we give this little webinar. And the question is, why aren't there more? And I know it's not about excellence, because there are plenty of excellent CEOs or on their way to be CEO types who come from the Black community. Talent is distributed equally, but access and opportunity isn't. So part of me wants to question what's happening in the companies. Part of me also wants to know that when are we going to at least get to the parity? If we have 13% of the population, why shouldn't we have 13% of the Fortune 500? That would be 65 Black CEOs, men and women who were at the top of their organization. If we had that, then we could see a whole lot of change. I'll tell you that, because some of the decisions and some of the things that these large companies would be doing, they wouldn't be able to do with a Black CEO, a Black face in a high place. And I'm not trying to make it a competition. I'm just trying to make this an inclusive economy, and think for everyone who's involved, wherever you are in the hierarchy, whatever you do within this industry, your representation matters, but so does the fact that we have people who are at the top who also are thinking about what's happening in a community sense. Those two things can live at the same time, in the same body, in the same strategies. And I think that's a lot of what we talk about in the book.
Amazing. Wow. It is 4:45. We just spent 45 minutes having this really insightful conversation. And so I want to encourage you to ask a few more questions. I love just how active the chat feature is. So keep those questions coming. I have just one closing question to the both of you. I mean, you've really put out a lot of information for us to think about and mull on, especially for those of us who are in leadership roles, and how to think through that social responsibility as well as the profits, and how to make sure that one doesn't outweigh the other. So as I think about the book, Black Faces in High Places, what is our challenge? Tell us what we need to do. I know you've been telling us that for 45 minutes, but try to kind of think through that and synthesize it in part of your closing remarks to us. As you think about the book, as you think about the challenge and everything you shared, what is that challenge to us as leaders? I liked what you said, sometimes you still got to preach to the choir. We need to hear it over and over and over again. So let's tell us more. What is our challenge from the book, and what can we do?
Yes. So I'll let Dr. Robinson, who has been NAMIC family longer than me, but I'm now NAMIC family. I'll let him close this out. And I will say, as chairman and CEO of BCT Partners, we are grateful that we are partnered with NAMIC through the seminars that we've been working with Dr. Robinson, who's leading the way. But Anne-Marie, to you and the NAMIC leadership and to the NAMIC community, I just want to say thank you for this opportunity and for the partnership that we've established between our organizations. To your question, there are several books that inspired this book. Why Should White Guys Have All the Fun by Reginald F. Lewis. 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen Covey. The Purpose Driven Life by Rick Warren. Ellis Coes's The Rage of a Privileged Class. If you don't know that one, you got to check that one out, folks. Rage of a Privileged Class by Ellis Coes. Another book that inspired this book was How to Succeed in Business Without Being White by Earl Graves, the late, great Earl Graves, founder and publisher of Black Enterprise. And in his book, the very last chapter, he talked about the 10 greatest challenges facing the Black community. Now, Graves's argument in that book, number one was racism. Some might argue that that's still our greatest challenge today. Debate that. Second challenge on Graves's list was verbatim, leveraging our might. Leveraging our might. Now, we coined that phrase for Strategic Action 6. Strategic Action 6 is called Leverage Our Might, channeling Earl Graves's legacy and his message. And now I'm gonna try not to get too excited, Anne-Marie, but that's where we introduce Ubuntu, is in Strategic Action 6, and bringing this idea of, I could say recapturing, but hopefully we haven't lost it. So it's just channeling this African-centered ethos that we are all in this together. I am because we are. And there's a quote in the book where we say, when you know who you are, you're not afraid to help people who look like you. Let that sink in. Let that sink in. And so I think our greatest challenge is, I think we underestimate our power. We underestimate the levers that are at our disposal. We underutilize the influence that we can wield, especially when we work together. And we open that chapter dispelling this myth that we can't work together, because we can, and empowering the reader with example after example after example of how we've done it over and over and over again. And on a closing note, this is our moment, folks. If you didn't figure it out, the memo went out on May 25th, 2020, when George Floyd got murdered. We will look back on 2020, 2021, 2022, and ask the question, what did you do? What did you do? Did you honor the moment like our ancestors honored the 60s? Or the period of enslavement of Africans in America? What did you do? And did you leave your place better than you found it when the window of opportunity opened, or was it the same? Did the status quo remain? Do not miss this moment, Namick. Make this moment a movement.
Whew. All right. Mic drop, Dr. JR.
That's that's quite a lot he said to follow, but I'm going to pick up from Ubuntu. And one of the reasons we start with George Floyd in the book and talk about the reactions of Black faces in high places is because they noted the same thing that we felt, that we could see what was happening and feel it on a visceral level, because George Floyd was us. You know, there's a connection there. And no, I didn't know him personally, but he's connected to me. We're part of the same community. So if you understand that, then you understand sort of the broader issues of, I am being a very successful Black professional, and yet there are issues and challenges in the community that I cannot ignore. And so, yes, we want you to be a success, but we also want you to be thinking about significance. It's not just about success. It's about what legacy are you leaving? What kind of impact are you leaving, and how you can navigate that? It's certainly a theme we start off with right in the introduction. And where we leave you at the end of the book is to understand how to seek significance. And when you put things in perspective like that, other pieces fall into place, because you have talents, gifts, and abilities. Your Blackness is an asset, not a liability. View it that way, carry yourself that way, and you will always use Black excellence as a setup for making more significance in the world.
Amazing. This has been soul food, cooked, delivered, I feel full. I feel fed. Thank you both. I knew this was going to be amazing, but you exceeded all our expectations. Wow. Wow. And of course, nobody wants this webinar to end because now all the questions are coming in. So let me read them as they're coming in. We have two new questions that have just been posed. One says, what do you recommend for us to break the ceiling that we have created for ourselves to enable us to utilize the talents and skills we have to be the leaders that we truly are, and encourage others to do the same? Dr. Pinkett, I think you were just about to respond to that. So why don't I give you the...
Yeah, I'm going to give a gift to the person who asked the question that was gifted to me by Dr. Robinson. Strategic Action 3 is about self-mastery and meaning, finding meaning, another deeper penetrating concept, finding one's meaning. And Dr. Robinson came across this framework called Ikigai. It's out of the Japanese tradition. Ikigai translated means meaning, your reason for being. And it talks about these 4 concentric circles of what do you love to do? What are you good at doing? What does the world want? And what can you get paid to do? And at the very center of those 4 circles is your Ikigai. And it's this wonderful juxtaposition against who you are and what the world is seeking and how you can do well. And so I say that to say to the question, I do believe that breaking the ceilings and enabling our talents and skills to shine their brightest is about how you intersect what you have been blessed with what the world is calling for. Because when you are in your Ikigai, your light shines the brightest, you do your best work. And I'm going to read you some quick numbers from the book. One of the studies we found from the book is that minorities who become executives have fewer promotions than minorities who plateau in their careers. I need you to digest that for a moment. Let me give you a quick number from the book. If you look at promotions for minority executives, on average, 0.7 promotions, which means if I were to say 0.5, that would be 1 promotion in 2 years. 1 divided by 2, 0.5. 1 promotion every 2 years would be 0.5. Minority executives are 0.7 promotions. Minority managers are 2, 1.9 to be exact. Almost triple the number. Almost triple. How do you reconcile that? Minority executives are saying no to lots of opportunities that don't tap into their Ikigai. But they're more discerning. Minority managers saying, I'll take that position and I'll take that one too, and I'll take that one too. And they hit a glass ceiling in doing so. The executives tap into their best, be their best, shine their best, fewer promotions to get to a higher place. That's some deep stuff right there. If you want that kind of deep stuff, you better get you a copy of the book.
Yes. Thank you.
That's
Thank
right.
you. Yes, this is being recorded. To everyone who's asking me that, yes, this is being recorded. It will be on NAMIC's YouTube channel. So more to come. There are a lot of amazing nuggets that were shared. Please buy the book. That is one way to help us get to where we need to go. When we write books for our people, we want them to buy them and read them. Don't let them get dust on the shelf. So please click on the link and buy the book. It will help you. I have my copy and I'm getting it for my son, because you know what? You've got to pass, and he's 16, but he's got to know these things so that he knows how to navigate the system. So buy the book for yourself, buy it for a family member. You can never have enough knowledge too early. Please position the future. Let them have these nuggets so that they know how to navigate tomorrow's workspace. So I have a question from C Powers, which is, I think this is our last question because we're really on time, that says, what is the most effective way to hold our companies accountable for change and opportunity after all the listening sessions following the public lynching witnessed by all of us?
Yeah, great question. And the short answer is, if you are in the room when some of these decisions are being made, you should be the one speaking up and perhaps giving some of the understanding as to why not only are these things needed, but perhaps giving advice. But sometimes we're not in those positions, and that's where we have to leverage our might. that's why organizations like NAMIC, or within your companies, you have employee resource or business resource groups. Those are some great forums and networking opportunities for you to be able to get some of those points put into the right hands. I've been working with several companies on things like this. And I know sometimes we don't want to be singled out as the only person, saying something or doing something. So that's where we have to come together with the working groups, come together with the group of other folks with similar identities, and make the list. These are the things that we are looking for. This is what's going to help with retention. This is what's going to help with recruitment. This is what's going to help in making this a better work environment. And that becomes a very strong mechanism, because now it's a group of Black employees and others who are allying. And it also gives those allies now some things that they can actually do when they say, I want to do something. Well, here you go. Here's a list.
Fantastic. Again, I can't thank you enough. Thank you, Dr. JR. Thank you, Dr. Randall. This was quite a soul food meal. Thank you. I feel like I'm in New Orleans. Lots of action-packed things for us to think about. There's always room for growth. So thank you for being with us today. In celebration of Black History Month, I couldn't have found a better way for us to really think through some of the hurdles, opportunities, and challenges that may come, but with solutions on how to address those. So as we close out Black History Month and celebrate, buy the book, share it, and come back and let us know what you thought about it. I'm here. I'm Anne-Marie Burton, the Chief of Strategy and Programs. Dr. JR is our lead faculty, so he's always here, and we can have another session where we could address your questions should you have them. So please stay in touch, and we hope that you found this to be as useful as we did, and we look forward to seeing you next time. Bye.